Hello and welcome to Into the Mythic. I'm Leanne O'Donnell, and as usual I'm here with Polo Coleman on the southwest coast of Ireland, and together we're going to explore a very old story from Irish mythology to see what relevance and resonance it might have for us all now. Today's story is about a goddess named Macha, who is best known for the pivotal role she played in the epic events of the famous Táin. But it turns out Macha has a lot to tell us about things much more important than cattle raids.
Well, Macha is a woman of the She, and we talked about the She before, but the She are the others, the people who are here before we came, before the Gaels came to Ireland, and we talked about that in the arrival of Amragan and the sons of Mill. But the She then are the people that we associate with the fairy folk. They had special powers, extra powers, arcane powers that we don't understand. So we're a bit afraid of them. And they, if you remember from that story, they live in a parallel universe, if you like, sideways to the sun. So in a different place, they're living, they're carrying on. But when they were finally defeated by the sons of Mill in that great battle that we spoke about before, they retreated there. So, but every now and again they come and they mingle with us. They interfere, if you like, but take a hand in things happening here.
In terms of how she gets involved in the human world, tell me what happens there when she gets involved with the Ulster cycle.
In the Ulster cycle and the Táin in particular, she lays the foundation for the Táin. So in the story, there's a man called Cronach, and he's a widower, a nice man, a good man, and has some sons, and he has a strong holding somewhere in Ulster in the hills. And one day he's sitting outside his rath, his homestead, and he sees this tall, striking, beautiful woman walking towards him. And she keeps walking, and she smiles at him and greets him and walks past him and starts working in the house, preparing dinner. And then they're called into dinner, and the sons come in amazed as well, and she feeds them as they've never been fed before. And then she clears up afterwards, a perfect woman, and then she goes to his bed with him, and she becomes his wife, and she stays with him and becomes the mother to his sons and the wife to him. And this is Macha. She tells him her name, and he knows that she's a woman of the She.
So this is a kind of it feels to me like a fairy tale trope where there's a man kind of working in the woods,
yes,
and then this otherworldly being arrives. And was there anything special about him?
No, we don't know anything else about him before this story, apart from this little story, except that he's just there one day, a widower, and into his lap falls this
goddess,
yeah,
who cleans his house, makes his dinner, and then goes to bed with him.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. And so what happens next then?
Well, she has all kinds of gifts. We're implicitly told, and at one stage it's the annual great fair is going to be held, where the King of Ulster holds an annual fair, and it's where everybody meets, and there are various sporting events as well as trading and buying and selling of horses and so on. So he's going to go to that, and she tells him she's not going. She doesn't want to go, and she says, and don't talk about me to anyone there, because that won't be good. So he agrees and heads off to the fair. Now, when he gets there, all of Ulster is there. There's everything. There's horse racing, there's chariot racing, there are tricksters and gamers and jugglers, and there's the trading, the horse trading, the cattle trading, everything. All of life is happening in this place. Huge numbers of people gather together. The highlight of the fair is the main race at the end, and that all the winners of all the other races compete. So the winner of the chariot race, the chariot and horse, and go against the winner of the horse race and against the winner of the running race. And it's over a short distance, so they all have an equal chance. Of course, the runner can start more quickly than the chariot can get going, and so on. But anyway, this is the big point of it, the big highlight of the fair day. So they're watching the chariot race and the king's chariot. The king is he's not really mentioned much in this story, except that he's an ego. He has an ego, and his chariot manages at the last minute to win the chariot race. So he's very puffed up and happy about that. And people seem to be glad, possibly because it's good to have a happy king rather than an angry king. And then, so they're all exclaiming how wonderful the horse is, his chariot and his charioteer, and nothing could beat them. And Cronach can't help himself, and it slips out kind of in a murmur that he says, well, as fast and all as he is, my wife Macha can run faster. And someone hears him and picks him up on it. And, we've talked about this pride and face and, keeping face and that kind of honour, in inverted commas, that was so strong in these stories, and it comes into play here. So Cronach, instead of just saying, oh, nothing, or backing down or whatever, has to stick to his guns. And it gets louder and louder, and more people get involved, and soldiers of the king here, and finally he's dragged before the king. And the king says, what's all this about? And the king is in a good mood at this stage because he's won the race. But they force the story out of him, and he's not going to back down. He's not going to be called a liar, and especially now it's gone too far. So he says, look, all I'm saying is my wife Macha can run faster than any horse. So, of course, no one believes him. And at first they thought he was just drunk and silly. But at this stage, nobody can back down. The king doesn't want to back down now, and his mood has changed from being jubilant and happy and victorious and probably winning a lot of money to being angry and disgusted at this lie. So they send for Macha, and they keep Cronach there imprisoned. And the soldiers go and they meet Macha, and they find Macha heavily pregnant. So that's a little bit of a spanner in the works. But they bring her back to the king anyway, and the king is a bit taken aback at this because the optics of this are not great. But neither Macha nor Cronach will back down, so the king can't back down either. So Macha asks him not to force her to race, but the king insists, and everyone is listening at this stage. So the race goes ahead.
So the king, even though she says, look, don't make me prove that I can run faster, he insists. He
insists at this stage because he's a bit of an idiot, obviously, but his ego has taken over. And without this ego, of course, you don't have the great stories. So you have to have the flaw in the character, and his flaw is that. And, a funny thing is, or an interesting thing is, his name is not recorded, despite all the other names, lots of other names who are insignificant in the story being remembered. I won't go into them now because they're too confusing, but the king's name, he's just the king of Ulster.
Excellent. Well, that's kind of some degree of revenge, yes, or at least fairness coming out of it.
So the race must go ahead, and Macha is really annoyed at this and very, very heavily pregnant, as I said. So the race starts and she takes off, and the charioteer of the king whips the horse up, and horses, I'm not sure if it's one or two horses, and it's throwing up sods of turf and everything, but he just can't catch this woman. And everyone is amazed at how fast she can run despite being heavily burdened by her burden, her belly. And she crosses the line quite a bit before the king's horses, but she falls down over the line and gives birth immediately. So she falls down on the ground, and the baby is born, but it's not one baby, it's twins. So they're all there lying on the grass, on the trampled grass with a big crowd around them, and the babies are dying in her arms from all that exertion and so on, and she is dying too. But before she dies, she calls a great curse on Ulster. And she says, by all the powers, whenever Ulster is in its greatest need, all the men of Ulster will go through what I go through for 3 days and 3 nights. And then she dies. So everyone is horrified, not only at the outcome of this race, at how ill-considered it was, but also at the curse, because people would have had a very strong feeling about curses, and particularly in this story they do. So they know, this doesn't bode well.
So all the men of Ulster will have the equivalent of her labour pains.
Her labour pains, yes.
And then her dying.
I suppose, yes, yeah.
Her dying pains. And her babies died too?
Yes.
This is an awful story.
It is. So the king then, in an effort to expiate some kind of guilt, says, well, this is bad, but what we'll do is we'll build a city here, and we'll name it after her dead children, Awa and Macha, the twins of Macha. So that becomes the city of Armagh, which is there today. And that became the centre of Ulster, which was that great power. Now, this was 9 generations before the start of the town, before the row between Maeve and Ailill that set in motion the cattle raid into Cooley in Ulster.
That's amazing. And so there's a couple of things I just want to pick up on there. The story begins with this radiant, otherworldly being arriving and choosing this man as her husband. Does he know that she's of the other people at this point?
He does, because of her beauty, and if he doesn't, he soon finds out because she tells him who she is and where she comes from.
And she lives happily with him, but then he goes to the fair, and even though she says to him, "Don't tell anybody about me."
Yes.
So that's kind of that's the critical narrative twist, isn't it? He can't resist.
Yeah. He can't resist saying it, and then he can't back out of it and say, "Oh, I didn't mean it. I was only joking or drunk or mistaken."
So then he loses everything, and she loses everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And eventually Ulster loses everything as a result. So there is a sense of payment may be a long time coming, but it comes. Vengeance or
retribution.
Retribution, that's the word, yes.
Yeah.
Because this takes place 9 generations before the beginning of the town, of the cattle raid. And during that time then, at first the people are very fearful and careful and worried, but as 9 generations gradually pass, it recedes into memory and just a story to frighten people around the fire at night. And it's not until all that time later, when Conor is king of Ulster and Maeve and her armies and the deposed King Fergus arrive, that Ulster then finally experiences the dread need, and all the men go into their labour pains then.
It's another great story, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
this kind of the hubris and the human folly, and again this interaction between the otherworldly, the she, who are magical and powerful, and they can transcend everything, except somehow they get tripped up by human foibles. So by boasting about her husband destroys her.
Yes, and it seems like even with the Greek legends and other legends around the world or mythologies, they seem to be just as gripped by the human like frailties and arrogance and hubris and those vices and virtues, whatever they would be, they seem to exist just as strongly or even more strongly with them. Because she could have just said, "No, I'm too sick, I'm too ill, I'm too close to childbirth. Forget about it." Or "He's drunk, he's always telling lies." She could have got out of it, but she didn't either.
This question of honour that has come up before in a lot of our stories, that nobody wants to lose face.
Yeah.
And so she had to compete.
She had to do it. She had to prove her husband right and prove herself right.
Golly, it's a big price to pay.
It is.
So the curse is that in Ulster's hour of greatest need, every man will experience the equivalent of her labour pains.
Yes.
And thereby be unable to fight.
Laid low for a crucial 3 days and 3 nights.
So nothing happens over a period of 9 generations, or various things happen, but the curse is not activated.
It's not. Obviously, it's not as much of a threat to Ulster. Various things do happen during those 9 generations, presumably, but Ulster is growing stronger and stronger all that time, until at the time of the Táin, it's huge. It's the most powerful province, the most powerful kingdom in Ireland, or even further afield, probably.
The power and the wealth of Ulster at this time inevitably bred rivalry and greed, and the king, Fergus, was tricked out of his throne by his nephew and his nephew's mother. Fergus headed off to Connacht and took refuge with Maeve, Queen of Connacht, and bided his time to return and reclaim his kingdom. Meanwhile, his hosts, Queen Maeve and her husband Ailill, have their own domestic drama unfolding.
Around that time, then, Maeve and her consort Ailill have a row over who owns the most. And to Maeve's disgust, Ailill, they're exactly equal, except that Ailill, her consort, owns a bull that is unmatched by any other bull in the province of Connacht. However, there is one in Ulster, and Maeve determines to get that by fair means or foul, and it ends up by foul, by raiding. So she takes all her army. She promises promises Fergus, the deposed king, that she'll give him her kingdom back when they defeat Ulster. So he goes with her with all his men, and they head across the country to attack Ulster. So this is Ulster's moment of greatest peril.
So it's interesting that it's not just Connacht and Maeve's power. She has Fergus, the former king, and his retinue. So it really is a big threat to Ulster.
Yeah.
So 9 generations after the first story you just told about Macha, we have this really serious threat arriving at the Ulster frontier.
Yes.
And then what happens?
Instead of being able to, the whole army, which would have been able to defend Ulster and drive off the Connacht men, instead of all of those men jumping up and grabbing their spears and weapons and attacking and driving them off, they're laid low with this curse. And they remember the curse then, that this is Macha's curse. So they're all in agony, in pain. They can't move, they can't get up. So the Connacht men, the Connacht army are just approaching. And the only one who can stand against them is Cuchulainn, because a bit like Macha, he is partially of the Sidhe. His father was Lu Lavada. So he's not a man in the sense of the other men of Ulster being a man. He is part God or part other. So he's immune to it. So he fights the single action against them to slow them down, biding his time or holding them back until the Ulster men can recover and rally, which they eventually do and drive off the Connacht army.
It's a critical part of the story of the Táin that the Ulster men are laid low, and yes. Cuchulainn has to come to the rescue and fight them all in single combat.
Exactly, yes. Yes, it's crucial because without Macha and without her curse, you couldn't have had the reason that the Ulster men couldn't defend Ulster.
Yeah, so it creates the whole story, really.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's fascinating. There's something kind of uncanny and unsettling about the idea that curse could just resonate down the generations, almost out of mind, out of memory, until it kicks in just at the most important moment.
Yes, yeah. And it feeds into the storytelling tradition here, which does always bring about justice, no matter how delayed. It seems, as we listened long ago to stories, we wanted some kind of retribution or justice to happen, and we didn't mind if it took a long time, because the stories went on for ages anyway, and it added to the story. But it had to happen. There had to be the right retribution, the right end. People had to pay the scales.
Things have to come back into balance.
Yes, yeah.
So there's a sense and an understanding that something wrong was done. There was a wrong.
Yes, yeah.
And then it needs to be balanced out later on.
Exactly.
By the retribution.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
And the retribution could be greatly exaggerated compared to the original wrong, so that so many people could die. It isn't just one person dies, a life for a life or an eye for an eye. It's a whole kingdom and all those people all those great warriors who died in that series of battles and in that story.
But I suppose her individual suffering, which was great, you couldn't put a weight on her individual suffering and her death and the death of her babies.
Yeah. So it demanded a great sacrifice or a great retribution.
A great price had to be paid.
Yes, yeah. There is a philosophical theory that from long ago, that those people who were in that story, if they believed in the curse, then the curse existed. So if they believed they were going to be laid low, they would be laid low. If they believed they would die, they might die. So they believed in it so strongly that it possibly could have happened, just because it was said that it would.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also the distinction between the curse in and of itself and the story that was told about it for 9 generations.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're still telling this story. So the story has its own power because it brings the curse down the generations.
Yes, yeah.
Because if it's totally forgotten and the story evaporates, then does it have any power, I wonder?
Well, true. And also, I think we still like that sense of retribution, the price to pay, because we don't really, we might comment, ooh, that was a big price, but we tell that story still, and Macha, this happened to her and she had the curse, and then this happened to Ulster. And we just sort of take it that, well, that's the way it happened. the scales had to be balanced. So we do accept it still to this day.
Yeah, I think so. Like when I hear that story now, I think, well, that's a reasonable price to have to pay for doing something so stupid and so dreadful and causing such suffering.
And it is nice as well to feel that everyone will get justice, no matter how late and how slow it is in coming.
And even, of course, it's not the same people, because it's 9 generations later.
Exactly,
the people who committed the wrong are long gone, but it's echoing down through the community, through the tribe. Yeah.
And of course, that sense of the tribal sense would have been, of course, extremely strong. And there is a sense just in the everyday law, the Brehon laws, which we've touched upon in the past, but it was the law of these people right up to the 16th century or so. But several generations would be responsible for repaying to the victim what the victim was due to be paid because of the wrong done to him or her. And they took that as, they accepted that several generations.
This reminds me very frivolously that I had a plumber yesterday who said, there's no end to a mistake. It's probably true of plumbing and true of tribal misdeeds. That if you do something that wrong, the consequences follow on. If you put the pipes in the wrong place.
Drip.
It's kind of worse than drips, but there's no end to a mistake, and maybe there's no end to a wrong. But then maybe there is an end, because in this story, they got their comeuppance.
But Owen Macha was burnt to the ground, and the kingdom of Ulster was razed to the ground and destroyed. The power of Ulster was destroyed. But maybe that's what they deserved, because it was that kind of hubristic sense of power that led to it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of interested, it's a little bit tangential, but what I feel when you tell the story is there's power and there's success in Ulster, and they're strong and complacent, but somewhere underlying that is some feeling of guilt.
Yes, yeah.
Psychologically, there's a guilt there that did we do something wrong somewhere in order to have all this? There's an awareness maybe of the hubris or wrongs that have been committed in order to establish power and territory to that extent. And then the story explains that, we did something wrong. Our king did something wrong, and it will come back.
Yeah, sure, yes, yeah.
Somehow there's a sense that of having not behaved quite right, having done something out of balance.
Yeah, true.
And very interesting that it's a story again about, there are two elements to Macha. She's female and she's of the she, and she was wronged.
Yes, yeah.
So there's some sense there that this Iron Age warrior caste are aware of having wronged the people who were there before.
True, yes, yeah.
Because we have that in our previous podcast about the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Sons of Meal.
Yes.
There's an underlying sense that the people who were here first were wronged. And they're there, and they're kind of not necessarily friendly as a result.
Yes, yeah, true.
Well, amazing. Well, what a story. There's a lot of different elements in that story. And ultimately the sense of the wheel will turn, a great wrong will be balanced out eventually.
Yes, yeah.
And what the king, whose name we don't know, which is great, what the king did to Macha and her unborn children was eventually balanced out by the turning of the wheel when Ulster really needed their warriors. They couldn't fight.
And also a sense, I suppose, that eventually, no matter how powerful a kingdom is, its day will pass and it'll sink into the dust. And someone else will arise.
And there'll be a new story. A new story.
Let's hope so we can keep this going.
Yeah, there's loads of stories. There'll always be stories, I suppose, as long as we can tell them.
Yeah.
Great, Paul. That's really lovely. Thank you. Really interesting. Lots to think about.
Yes, lots in that, yeah. The more you think about them, the more there is to think about.
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? There's a lot to think about with this story, and I have to say that it's left me wondering about a few things. It seems pretty clear to me now that Macha was not just a beautiful otherworldly character who provided an important plot point in an epic about cattle raiding and warriors. If you look at her in the context of mythologies all over the world, she actually has all the characteristics of an archetypal fertility goddess or a land goddess. She comes out of the woods to offer her bounty to Cronach and his sons. She's by turns radiant maiden and nurturing mother. And of course, in the end, she has the classic crone capacity to place a dreadful curse on the men around her. So in this story, I think Macha represents the divine feminine. She is abundantly fertile. She carries 2 children in her belly. She is beautiful and fast and very powerful. But the story tells us she's not invulnerable. She can be hurt. She can be pushed too far by the arrogance and the hubris of the humans around her. I think the Iron Age cattle-raiding warrior society who told this story for 9 generations before the events of the Táin, and then for thousands of years afterwards, were actually telling a story about the consequences of a failure to honour and protect the divine feminine. Somewhere in the midst of the racing and the boasting, the power trips and the ego, there was an understanding that there is something bigger and more important than all of that, something immensely sacred that needs to be honoured and protected. And there's an understanding in this narrative of the dreadful consequences of failing to do this. The men will be cursed just when they need to be at their strongest. The shamefaced king who made Macha race named his city Armagh after Macha's twins to try and assuage his guilt, but a bit of guilt after the fact never does anyone much good, and in the events of the Táin, the whole city was razed to the ground. Everything was lost. So perhaps more than anything, this is a cautionary tale. The divine feminine is bountiful and potent, but she can be pushed too far. She can be harmed and dishonoured. And if she is, then the ongoing consequences will be dire. Into the Mythic is made possible by the generous support of Wild Goose Studios, a family-owned craft studio based in Kinsale, County Cork.